Welcome to Arts 290, which the Center for European Studies has hijacked today, and we're so grateful for that. I'm Katie Shanahan-Lindner. In case you don't know me yet, I'm the Executive Director of the Center for European Studies here at UNC-Chapel Hill, and I am thrilled that Professor Gesche Würfer was open to letting us collaborate in class today. So hello to all the Arts 290 students, and hello to everyone else who's joined us today, all of our other students and community members. It's great to see your names up on the screen. And I also just want to say that we're, these strange times that we're in do allow us to use Zoom in a way that we wouldn't necessarily, right? And that has positive and negative effects. We'd much rather be in a room with Peter Stein and talking directly to you, face-to-face, in person. But at the same time, today we get to be together and bring people in from all over, regardless of where we're located geographically. And for that, we're grateful to the technology. So I have the pleasure of introducing Gesche Würfer this morning, and then I'll pass the baton over to her. Many of you know her as your faculty, but Gesche has quite a story. She's a visual artist based here in Chapel Hill, as well as, of course, on the faculty of the Arts and Art History Department. She has an MFA from UNC-Chapel Hill, as well as an MA in Photography and Urban Cultures from Goldsmiths, University of London in the UK, and a diploma in spatial planning from the Technical University Dortmund. Her photography has been published and of course exhibited in, for example, a small museum called the Tate Modern in London. Just kidding, it's really quite impressive. At Goldsmiths, of course, several galleries here in the US, including the Contemporary Art Museum CAM in Raleigh. She's won many awards up and down from various locations in the US and in Europe. And she's currently represented by the Tracy Morgan Gallery in Asheville. And I highly recommend you visit her site, geschewürfer.com, to find out more about her and see her, her art. We're partnering together today because Gesche won an award from the Center for European Studies, our Jean Monnet EU Research Award last summer, and was able to go to Europe, 3 different locations, 3 different countries, to do research, and she's putting that research that she did into her class. So that's where this collaboration comes from. We're very proud and grateful to be working with Gesche on a regular basis, and we're really thrilled to do this event today. So I'm going to let Gesche introduce our fabulous guest, and pass the baton. Thank you, Gesche, and thank you, Peter.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Katie, and thank you for organizing this talk. And also thank you to Lily Herbert and Alison Winker with all your technical support. So we are all very happy to be with you today. And well, I would really like to thank Peter Stein for giving a talk today. I met Peter in 2016 through the Holocaust Speakers Bureau, and I interviewed and portrayed Peter for my project, What Remains of the Day, Memories of World War II. And we have stayed in touch since then. And I'm now very excited that Peter agreed to talk to us as part of my Arts 290 class, Exploring the City Through Visual Arts. We have talked about the Holocaust, and we've also been exploring Prague as one of the 3 cities, so Berlin and Warsaw are the other 2 cities. So I think everybody is excited to hear more from Peter. Now let me introduce Peter Stein. Peter Stein was born in Prague, Czechoslovakia before the German occupation. His father, Viktor, was Jewish, and his mother, Zdenka, was a Catholic, both of whom survived the Holocaust. Peter traces the hardships faced by his parents and their relatives in his memoir, A Boy's Journey from Nazi-occupied Prague to Freedom in America, that was published in 2019. So you can see an image of Peter's book on your screen. Peter was 12 when he arrived in New York City's harbor. He learned English, attended the City College of New York, and received a Ph.D. in sociology from Princeton University. As a young professor, Stein faced a colleague who was a Holocaust denier, and Peter came to realize the importance of sharing his experiences, eventually becoming a Holocaust educator. He taught at William Patterson University and the Institute on Aging at UNC-Chapel Hill, where he was also active with the local Holocaust Speakers Bureau. He lives in Washington, D.C. with his wife, Michelle, their 5-year-old grandson Jackson, and Peter volunteers at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, meeting with students and adult groups from many sections of the U.S. So I will hand over to Peter now, and if you have any questions that you would like to be answered later in the Q&A session, please send them to me through the chat window, and I'll take notes of the questions. Now, I hand over to Peter.
Thank you so much, Geshe. It's great to be in Carolina again, but as Katie said, I wish that we could do this together, not virtually, but in real life. But I miss my friends in Chapel Hill at UNC, so I'm glad to be with you. I want to thank Geshe for this wonderful introduction. By the way, she's a wonderful photographer, in case you didn't know that. Also, want to thank the Center for European Studies, Katie Lindner, the executive director, Alison Rinker, and Lily Herbert. I appreciate all of their help and their kindness to a fellow who's not as technologically savvy as you may be. I also want to thank Kerry Bannister, who is at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum and handles about 35 survivors and their technological challenges. And thanks for all of you for being here. I'll speak for maybe about a half hour about the Holocaust, about my family, but it's also a story of immigration, and that may resonate with some of you. Then we'll have plenty of time for your comments and questions when I finish. Okay, so I click on this. I came to the States with my mom in 1948, November, Election Day, which looms large on our calendars today. We sailed into New York Harbor past the Statue of Liberty, and she was lit up, and all the passengers went to the top of the boat, the New Amsterdam, and you could hear the ahs and the oohs, the wonderful view of not only the statue, but the New York Harbor. And I wanted to stay up all night. And my mom said, well, why? I said, I want to see King Kong, because I had seen the original King Kong movie. And of course, she climbed the statue of the Empire State Building. So I thought I could do that, and she talked me out of it. Waiting on the next day as we left the boat, were Marianne and Leo Altheim, our sponsors. And every refugee seeking admission needed to have a sponsor to make sure that we didn't fall into bad times and that we were financially solvent. They were both stamp dealers. Marianne was on one of the last planes from Vienna, Austria to New York, and she worked at the Macy's stamp section. Lovely, lovely people. Leo could not get a visa to the States, and he spent the war in Shanghai. And Shanghai is in China. It was occupied by the Japanese, and there were 30 to 40,000 Jewish refugees who survived the war in Shanghai. And he became my surrogate father. in the absence of my biological dad. So the story begins in Czechoslovakia, a country that the First Republic existed from 1918 to 1938. And I don't know if you can see the little arrow, but you can see that the country survived in a difficult neighborhood. Germany to the west, Austria, the Ukraine, Poland, and further east, the Soviet Union. It's a landlocked country, Czechoslovakia and Slovakia. Prague is where we lived, and you'll see the red star on the map. That's the capital of the country. And north of that is a place called Terezin. And Terezin was a ghetto and a concentration camp where most Czech Jews were sent, many from there to Auschwitz or Malý Trostenec in the Ukraine. And my dad was sent there. He survived, unlike the rest of his family. So this is where we lived. You can see my room in the castle. I had a lovely view. That's a joke. Anyway, this was actually the real home of Charles IV, who was the head of the Holy Roman Empire. And since Katie's been to Prague, she probably knows the coffee houses that can be found to the left or right of the castle. And if you go, wear very good walking shoes because it's full of cobblestones. And the climb up to the castle is a bit exhausting. And this is a view from the castle area of the Charles Bridge. And this is one of the many pedestrian bridges in Prague. This was taken in 2012 when I was there with my wife and my son and his wife. Lots of people walking. And this is the bridge that connects the old section with the new section of Prague. On this same bridge, on March 15th, 1939, German troops came in to occupy Prague. In May of 1945, Russian Soviet troops came in to liberate us. And on the same bridge in April of 1948, Czech communist workers marched into Prague and took over the government. So a lot of memories. But the water, the river is called the Vltava. And if you follow Czech music, Smetana has a wonderful symphonic piece about the river. Its German name is the Moldau. And it's an important river for me for two reasons. I learned how to swim in this river, and we learned how to ice skate. We lived about 20 minutes west out of Prague in an area called Braník. Okay, so what about my parents? In a beautiful day in May 1934, Prague spring, a young Jewish boy, Victor Stein, marries a young Catholic woman, Zdenka Květanova. They marry not in a church, not in a temple, but in town hall. And the town hall, if you go to Prague, is near around the corner from the astrological clock, where you see the apostles and all kinds of folks coming out every hour. And it's a great, great sight. But they fell in love, and the fact that my dad married a Christian pretty much saved his life later on during the occupation. Before the Germans came, I had a nice couple of years with my mom, who was my major caretaker. She was a teacher and stayed home and just provided all kinds of things for me. During the war, she was never in a camp, but she was a survivor as well, caring not only for me, but also her aging parents. My dad loved to swim. He introduced swimming to my life, and we had a good time. And the picture all the way to the right must be the first time that Prague celebrated Take Your Toddler to Work Day. And there he is in front of his office. But Hitler and the Nazis were getting ready to start a major conflict. And in September of 1938, there was a fear that the German army could take over the Sudetenland. The Sudetenland is an integral part of Czechoslovakia, inhabited primarily by German-speaking Czech citizens. And so the Czech Army was mobilized to defend that area. And my dad was a first lieutenant in the Czech Army, and I love this picture because this is, of course, the dress uniform, and you'll notice a sword by his side, which is great for parades, not so good in fighting the German army. Nothing much happened, but 6 months later, the German army occupied Prague, occupied Czechoslovakia and Prague, March 15th, 1939. With the Nazi occupation came the Holocaust. And this is a complex area. And I will just say for now that the Holocaust involved the murder of 6 million men, women, and children due to their religions or their grandparents' religion. It also involved the destruction of Jewish communities and culture in Europe. Economic, social, political, and religious life, which had been in Europe for more than 2,000 years. And when you look at the history of Europe, you see how long Jews have lived there, contributed, and led productive and important lives in Europe. And yet, here came the Holocaust. It's important to remember there were at least 5 million other victims, political prisoners, communists and socialists, particularly Russian and Polish army prisoners, clergy and nuns. In the upper left-hand corner is a group of Polish Catholic priests who were arrested and sent to camps. And on the lower left side, a group of homosexuals sent to Bergen-Belsen to their deaths. Jehovah's Witnesses, Romani, the Gypsies, and the physically and mentally disabled. So there was a long list of people who suffered as a result of the Nazi occupation and the Holocaust. Let me switch to one family, my favorite family, the Stein family, pictured on a German beach, yes, German beach, roughly 1912, about 2 years before World War I. And you see my grandfather, Joseph Stein, who was a grain merchant, including grains and things that were needed for the manufacture of beer, hops, yeast, malt, grains. And our son is a home brewer, and he loves to learn about his grandfather, who provided all of these ingredients to Czech and German brewers. And when we were in Prague, I wanted to show all kinds of things to my son. He mostly was interested in learning about his grandfather, who had a career in providing beer ingredients. So here's Joseph, my grandmother, Sophie, and their 2 daughters, Carla and Camilla and Richard. the tragedy of this photograph is that only 2 people survived the Holocaust. The young man in the sailor suit is my dad, Victor, and to his left is my aunt, Emma. Emma survived because she married a Protestant, and my dad married a Christian, and that really was very important indeed. Okay, so my dad had a degree in engineering, and he started a Bentwood Factory, making all kinds of things out of bentwood, including tennis rackets, ping pong rackets, skis, wagons, furniture, what have you. And it was a successful factory. His major point of pride was that a French Davis Cup player, Jean Borot, played with my dad's standard racket for a couple of years. So that was great. So he spent several years during the occupation doing manual labor, or called forced labor, in and out of Prague. And for me, he was a very shadowy figure. He would appear for a little bit and then he would disappear. He would come back, disappear again. And whenever I asked my mother, where's my dad? She would say, he's on a business trip. He'll be back as soon as he can. And it's the exact same language that my mother's sister, Olga, used with her 2 kids, my 2 cousins, because their father was also a Jewish businessman. And she would say, as did my mother, your dad will be back as soon as he can. Well, in 1944, my dad was sent to Terezin. And you may know that at the entrance to each major concentration camp was a German slogan, Arbeit macht frei, that work will make you free. Sort of one of the euphemisms that the Nazis used to try and confuse people or deceive people on what lies ahead, somehow thinking if you work hard enough, you will survive. Tragically, that was not the case. Terezin was a former military camp built in 18th century and was crowded with Jewish men, women, and children who were sent there. You see people carrying between 30 and 50 pounds. And I think, how does one decide what to take? You go in the middle of the winter, middle of the summer. It was a terrible situation. Here's an artist's rendition of what the men's barracks looked like. The barracks, and I went to the barracks with my dad when I was in college. So he stayed in one of the men's barracks that was built for 40 men. At the height of 1944 and 45, 350 to 400 men were ordered to sleep in this kind of situation with very few blankets, very few pillows, and vermin and rats and all kinds of terrible diseases going on. Okay, there's good news. Finally, in May 8th, 1945, the Soviet Army liberated Terezin. And in a truck like this one, I and my mother were living in Branik, and I was looking out the window on May 9th, a day after this, and I see a truck pulling in. And I run downstairs, and 2 Russian soldiers help a group of survivors, each wearing the Star of David. And I look in, and one of those people is my dad. And the Russian soldiers helped all the survivors off the truck. I hugged my dad, and the happiest day of my life. Somehow we were together. The family was together again. It was very moving. But my job during the war was to go to school, which I did. And here I am in the 2nd grade in Prague. learning penmanship. I'm still working on that. And it was particularly tricky with these pens that you had to dip into ink, which invariably would get all over your hands and the book. But here I am. And this is a picture of our second grade classroom. We had two teachers, Miss Prochaska and Mr. Novak. Mr. Novak taught us science and chemistry and all the hard science and math. And Miss Prochaska taught us about Czechoslovakia, Czech music, and the Czech language. And here I am working hard. And this is the class bully, a boy named Joseph, who in the second grade called me a Jew. And so we wound up in a bit of a tussle outside of the classroom. And he was a little stronger than me. And I wound up with a bloody nose. And my mother was very, very upset because she said, I told you never tell anyone that your father is Jewish. And I was trying to defend my father and also saying I was not a Jew. And it was a difficult situation. But what's missing from the photograph is the front of the classroom. In front of the classroom, Monday through Friday, was a picture of Adolf Hitler and the Nazi flag. So we knew who was in charge Monday through Friday. German soldiers were all around the city. And if anyone were to ask me, how did you feel? I think fear was my major, that's what I felt. Soldiers not knowing what they were doing here, what was happening. The soldiers were on the streets, in the tram, pretty much everywhere. And a couple of times we were taken as a class to a parade to welcome back the conquering German soldiers. In the book, and people in Goethe's class, if you had a chance to read chapter 4 and 5, I speak about an incident I had with an SS officer on a tram. I was taking the tram from Branik to school. I was reading a book, and I look out and I see a pair of shiny black boots, a green-gray uniform. My eyes continue to go up. I see the SS emblem, and every kid in Prague knew that the SS were the soldiers to stay away from. And on the cap, you see the skull and bones, and then the German eagle. And he, in a very loud German voice, says, "Get up and give me your seat." And I panicked. I put the book, I was reading a book like a good second grader, stuffed it, and tried to get away as far away from him as possible on the tram. When I got to school, Miss Prochaska saw how upset I was, and I became very paranoid, thinking he knows where my father was, or he knows that I'm half Jewish. I went through a whole litany of fears. But she assured me that, no, he just wanted a seat. He doesn't know you. He doesn't know where your dad is. But it gives you a sense of the fear and anxiety that was part of the experience. A couple of good things that we did for ourselves was to play football. And as you know, European boys and girls don't call it soccer, they call it football. And it was a place where we could play with no parents and no German soldiers. And the other place, of course, was ice hockey. And when the river froze over, it was lumpy, but it was fun. But the reality of the war was there. In 1944, 1945, we had air raid drills probably twice a week. Allied planes, American, Canadian, and British planes flying over Prague to bomb Germany. But in February 1945, Prague was bombed. What happened? It was the same day that Germany was bombed, in a saturation bombing of Dresden. And it turned out that one squadron of American planes misread the maps. The topography of Prague and Dresden from the air is very similar. There's a river going through it, there are bridges, and about 700 Czechs died that day, another 1,200 who were injured. A hospital was hit, a school was hit, and we were rushed down to the basement of our school, where we had known, we had previously always gone to the basement, nothing ever happened. This time you could tell from the fear on the teacher's eyes and the little kids starting to cry, this was real. Then we heard sirens, and I write about it in the book, but war became very real then. My Catholic grandparents were very important during the war. Virtually every Sunday, my mom and I would go there for dinner. And my grandmother Zdenka was a wonderful pastry chef. And despite rations and shortages, she was able to put a meal together, just amazingly so. My grandfather was interested in politics. So Sunday at 5 in the afternoon, we would go into his study. This is not he, this is the only picture I had. But he had a study where he put the map of Europe on his table. And he had a stack of black checkers and red checkers. The black checkers, he established German positions and holdings in Europe, including the Normandy beach. And then he used red checkers to indicate where allies had landed or were making advances. And he was also hard of hearing. So the radio broadcast was way too loud. And my mother was always upset, and she cautioned him, please turn it down. You know, you could be arrested. And my grandfather said, oh, don't worry about it. Everyone else in the building is listening to this, which was, of course, outlawed and forbidden by the German occupation. So I experienced early cognitive dissonance. Every Sunday, I would hear from my grandfather that the Allies were advancing, and what that meant for me is eventually I'd see my dad again. But Monday through Friday in school, the teachers were ordered to tell their kids that the German army is winning the war. So the war ends, and one of the stories that circulated was that the Jews didn't do enough to fight the Germans. They didn't do enough to defend themselves. And I found that in my own immediate, my own extended family, there were at least 3 sets of resistors. These 2 young men, Jan Marcus, who's getting married, and his brother Tomas, survived 2 years of hard labor in Auschwitz. They survived the death march from the Auschwitz concentration camp to a railroad station in Poland, where they were placed on trains and were shipped back to Germany. This is what happened. And apparently the winter of 1944-45 was especially oppressive, very cold. Anyway, they get on a train and they jumped off the train in Czechoslovakia. It's a long, long story. Again, it's in the book, but the 2 of them survived. Their parents were sent off to gas, killed in the camp within an hour of arriving. But the good news was they resisted, and they established the fact that not all Jews complied with what the Nazis wanted. This is my dad there. Okay. Then I have another relative, Kurt Fanta, and his wife Malvinka. And the quick story is that he was in the Czech Army. He was a socialist, so he went to the Soviet Union. Some Czech soldiers went to England, others went to the Soviet Union. He fought with the Soviet Army. He was wounded, and he was nursed to health by a nurse, Malvinka, who is a Soviet Jewish nurse. They married, and they came to Prague after the war. There's my mom, my dad, and that's me in wearing my shorts. And a third relative, just quickly, is Lieutenant Zdeněk Steiner. Here he is with the Czech squadron of the Royal Air Force, the 311th Squadron, and they flew over Germany and they helped liberate the country. Last month in Prague, and we left in 1948. I came to the States, just a few photos. I keep moving. With a friend Ross, I learned the great American game of football and became a naturalized citizen in 1955. And the funny story is I had to pass a test. I was taking a history class, so I knew who George Washington and Abraham Lincoln were, and that was enough to convince the examiner to make me an American citizen. So the war ends in 1945, but anti-Semitism and the Holocaust denial increases, sadly. It continues. The claim that the Holocaust never happened or was not official Nazi policy, Jewish deaths were exaggerated. And here in the introduction, Gershom mentioned the fact that I encountered a Holocaust denier who was a member of my faculty at a New Jersey college. And I really started and realized how important Holocaust education is when 4 of my students came to my class, to my office, and said, this is going on. And it continues to go on. Dwight Eisenhower, whose memorial just opened in Washington, D.C. last week, anticipated Holocaust denial. And he visited Ohrdruf, one of the camps, with George Patton and George Marshall. And he wrote that things I saw beg for description. The starvation and the cruelty were overpowering. I visited deliberately so I could give firsthand evidence, if ever, in the future. There's a tendency to charge these allegations merely to propaganda. And here we are in the future, in the year 2020, and Holocaust denial continues. The Southern Poverty Law Center, SPLC, has an annual report. They identified more than 1,000 hate groups this past year, which attack people's race, religion, ethnicity, sexual orientation, disability, and gender. And we know what's happened in the United States in the last couple of years. 112 neo-Nazi groups, and it's very worrisome development. Anti-Semitism has increased in Europe. France, with the largest Jewish community, has experienced a 74% increase of anti-Semitic incidents, as is the case in Germany, United Kingdom, and Poland. But there's hope, and I continue Holocaust education because young people can change the world. And here's Jackson, our grandson, who has his eye on the Capitol, and you know, as long as he can get some money together to run a campaign, who knows how far he'll go. It's hard to know how to conclude this presentation And I go back to Norman Rockwell's painting of 1961, The Golden Rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And you could see the diversity in our country in his painting. And we continue to need people listening to the Golden Rule. And I would just add the importance of building empathy, tolerance, and open-mindedness, some awareness that there are other people in the world besides us. Thank you.